From big knockouts to dramatic moments, intense fights, UFC 296 delivered on Saturday in Las Vegas, except for the main event, unfortunately. Brian Campbell recapping what was final pay-per-view of the year for the world's leading MMA promotion. And the UFC had a lot to like out of this with some big moments, including a big fight in the crowd between middleweight champion Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis. Unfortunately, that probably becomes the biggest headline, although it does point forward to the next pay-per-view on January 20th. This night was about largely, unfortunately, what didn't happen in the main event. Yes, Leon Edwards dominated and controlled Colby Covington to defend the title for the second time. Now with the Usman trilogy behind him, this was a mature step forward in some key ways for Leon Edwards, particularly in the wrestling department. We expected Covington to have an advantage there. We expected him to have some success there. But until the end of round 5, when Covington did turn the tables, you saw a very stingy Leon Edwards. He was efficient in how he was content to control Covington from the outside, but he physically overwhelmed him, and that really put Covington in a tough spot. If he wasn't going to be able to take Edwards down, was going to have some success on the feet, but there was far too little thrown from Covington in a very puzzling performance, made even more puzzling in a lot of ways by his post-fight speech afterwards, where he not only said he thought he won a fight in which he lost 4 rounds to 1, 49-46 on all 3 scorecards, to say, I don't have a scratch on my face, when Covington was cut open on his nose and had his was bleeding from inside of his nose earlier in the fight. A tough sell afterwards, because Covington did not put his best foot forward, did not come forward with big offensive surges, and really just looked to be injured or maybe sleepwalking until the 5th round. And that's when the tables unfortunately turned for Leon Edwards from a marketing standpoint. Yes, this was such a dominant effort that he still holds that critical pound-for-pound value right in and around number 5 on most people's lists, but he failed to entertain in the big moments and failed to really offensively put his foot on the gas against a fighter who just certainly wasn't himself after a 21-month layoff. It's not necessarily the age with Covington, who's 35. It's that long layoff, and it's the fact that if he can't get out and spam you with that offense or take you down and control you, what can he do? Edwards took away the takedown. In round 5, though, Covington finally got it and was able to convert that to top position, but just wasn't able to do much with it from a ground and pound standpoint or a submission threat standpoint. It wasn't a good look for Edwards, though, being on his back for so much of that second half of the 5th round. Edwards had a very babyface-like promo afterwards to the crowd and really shared his heart about how much he did cry out of rage and frustration after Covington made the remark at Thursday's wild press conference about Edwards' late father, who was murdered and had, I guess, a somewhat shaky past in history, but it was seen as very disgraceful. At the very least, people thought Covington was bringing the people in the building for a potential grudge match. That just didn't turn into the case. Puzzling performance from Colby, but made worse when he makes the champion in round 5. Certainly not finished strong in any way. There was booing throughout. It's not a great look marketing-wise for Edwards. Of course, maybe you can argue this fight should have been Bilal Muhammad, who did weigh in as the backup, but unfortunately did not get the call for him. He'll probably get the call next for the title, unless one of the breakthrough performers from Saturday is able to cut that line, and that is Shavkat Rakhmonov. We'll get to his fight in a second there, and the destruction he ultimately did against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. But like Wonderboy, who fought for the title unsuccessfully for the 3rd time, the same thing happened. I'm sorry, it wasn't a title match, obviously, this time for Thompson, but this was really his last shot at age 40 to try to get there. Is it Shavkat's time? Is it Bilal Muhammad's time? One thing, it's certainly probably not going to be Colby Covington's sign soon, despite everything he said afterwards about how much he wants to come back and be in big fights. In some ways, Edwards and Covington stained their own brand in their own way by this overall performance. It was a major letdown. It also was a technical showcase for exactly who Leon Edwards is at the end of the day. But this card also had nothing but fireworks to begin with. Let's talk about the fight that opened the pay-per-view card. Josh Emmett took on late replacement Bryce Mitchell, and they may have recorded the knockout of the year. A brutal counter right hand in round 1 was destructive, to say the least. Mitchell was not only knocked out cold, he was almost having seizure-like effects and shaking afterwards. It's a very resurrecting, potentially, victory for the late 30s Josh Emmett, who's closing in on 40 and was coming in off of 2 straight tough defeats against very elite competition. competition. This was the wake-up call his career needed, and that only continued the momentum of kind of some big crazy moments in this pay-per-view. And certainly the Paddy Pimblett-Tony Ferguson lightweight bout brought in a lot of that, hey, I just need to see it. Tony on this night didn't necessarily, he looked older, but he didn't necessarily look like a guy who was headed, unfortunately, to his 7th straight defeat. But for Paddy Pimblett, who really needed to look good, right? He had a long layoff with that ankle injury, a year. No one really believed he should have deserved the decision against Jared Gordon last time, but he did kind of positively repair his brand by how poised he was in picking Tony Ferguson apart. And even though Tony found that great late rally in the final and third round to maybe show life that something was there, as Paddy was just fading just a bit, veteran move there, it showed by Paddy for taking Tony down, controlling and ending that threat of that fight. That was also an interesting develop. That fight was very dramatic to watch. And now you have Tony Ferguson, the aging legend, with a 7-fight losing skid. Could the UFC justify bringing him back again? He ties BJ Penn for the longest consecutive losing streak in UFC history yet. He fought tough. He fought like a veteran, and his chin held up for the most of it. Let's talk quickly about what Shavkat Rakhmonov did. Came in 17-0, 17 finishes. Well, that's now 18, because Wonderboy Thompson, in his maybe last shot at age 40 to make some noise on the elite level, he was game from the standpoint of scouting Shavkat, of being stingy in the takedown defense, and really just making Shavkat work hard, even through some dangerous submission threat attempts from Shavkat. But Rakhmonov is such a patient finisher, and in round 3, he finally got his moment, and boy, did he close the door on Wonderboy. So you certainly tip your cap to the veteran Thompson, but Shavkat's the real deal, and he's scary. And you hope for Bilal Muhammad's sake he doesn't get passed over for a title shot. Co-main event, though, got to get quickly here. The flyweight title. Alexandre Pantoja, the rematch with Brandon Royval. I did believe there was reason to believe Royval could pull the upset here in a fight that was, odds were very close on paper, and we expected fireworks. But it really turned out in the end to be Pantoja, who was dominant in the wrestling space and really able to just control Royval. Late rally by Raw Dog was fun to see, but this was about Pantoja. Now, after pouring it out to win the title over the summer against Moreno, showing you now he could be a champion with staying power. The fight in the crowd, though, is what a lot of people are going to be talking about. Next pay-per-view is 297 in Toronto on January 20th. And Sean Strickland, after a crazy Friday press conference in the seasonal one previewing this card with Dricus du Plessis, they jawed because they were seated 2 rows apart from each other. Shown on the big screen, they started talking trash. Strickland waited for Gilbert Burns' kids to move out of the way, showed a little heart there. Then he hurdled 2 rows and started throwing haymakers on top of DDP. Yeah, this is how you build and sell a fight. You're going to see this clip go viral. It's got that old WWE kind of wild feel to it. There's also real heat between them. A lot of the talk at Friday's press conference was beyond kind of next level distasteful, really, from both. But now this matchup is just about that grudge war. It's going to sell. It's going to move. The middleweight division heating up with Sean Strickland as the champion. Somehow that became the biggest headline of the night. Unfortunately for Leon Edwards, he got some boos along with the victory. That was UFC 296, and that's a wrap for the UFC in 2023.